Welcome to our deep dive on Jacinda Ardern. You know, you've sent in some really interesting sources about her, like encyclopedia entries and articles and even some news from when she was prime minister.
Yeah, it's a really good mix. I think we can get a pretty good picture of her beyond, just her time in office.
Right. So I guess the best place to start is at the beginning, right? Her early life. I was looking through these sources and I was kind of surprised by her upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. She comes from a rural background in New Zealand, places like Morrinsville and Morapara.
And those places are like pretty conservative.
Right.
So it's kind of unexpected that she ended up with the Labor Party.
Yeah, I mean, it is unusual. It's not the typical path to, become a labor politician. So it does make you wonder how those early experiences kind of shaped her worldview.
Totally. Oh, and another thing that really stood out to me was that her dad was a police officer. I wonder if that had any influence on her later career.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible, right? Growing up with a parent in law enforcement probably gave her a strong sense of justice and community responsibility. And, we do see that reflected in her political career. She was always focused on social issues and advocating for people in need.
It's really cool how those little details from her childhood can connect to the bigger picture of her life.
Hmm.
And speaking of details, did you see that she worked at a fish and chip shop when she was a teenager?
Oh, yeah. It's like she's had those normal everyday experiences that we can all relate to. It makes her seem so much more down to earth.
Exactly. It makes her a lot more relatable. Okay, so moving on to her political journey.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear that she was interested in politics from a young age. I mean, joining the Labor Party at 17, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's serious commitment right there. And she wasn't just a member. She was actively working for important labor figures early on. Must have learned a lot from those experiences.
Yeah, I bet. It probably shaped her political ideology and her approach to leadership. And did you know she actually worked for Tony Blair in London for a while?
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. That's interesting. I mean, it must have been a really valuable experience for her, working in a different political system, meeting people from all over the world. It probably helped her to see things from a global perspective.
Yeah, I think so too. And that global perspective would definitely have come in handy later on when she was dealing with things like climate change and the pandemic.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, her rise through the ranks of the Labor Party was pretty remarkable. Becoming the youngest sitting MP in 2008 and then leading the opposition, that's a pretty steep trajectory.
Absolutely. It shows that she's a very capable and ambitious person. You don't get to that position without having a lot of talent and drive, and she clearly has both of those things in abundance.
For sure. And then, of course, there's the 2017 election. Talk about a game changer. I mean, taking over leadership just weeks before the vote,
Yeah.
and then seeing this huge wave of Jacinda mania sweep the country. It was pretty exciting to watch.
Oh, it was definitely a remarkable phenomenon. I mean, there was this feeling in the air that people were ready for change. And she represented something new and different. She had this fresh perspective and a really charismatic personality.
Yeah, and her policies definitely resonated with a lot of people, too, especially her focus on social justice and equality.
Right. She offered real solutions to the problems that people were facing, and she did it in a way that was both compassionate and pragmatic.
Now, even with all that momentum, Labour didn't win a majority in the election, did they? They had to form a coalition with New Zealand First and the Green Party.
That's right. It just goes to show how diverse the political landscape is in New Zealand. It's not a two-party system like in some other countries. You really have to be able to work with other parties to get things done.
Yeah, and that's a skill that she clearly developed early on in her career. It would come in handy later on, too, when she was dealing with, well, a lot of crises, to be honest.
Oh, definitely. The mosque shootings, the White Island eruption, the pandemic, it was a pretty turbulent time to be in charge.
Yeah, it was. But she seemed to handle those challenges with a lot of grace and strength and a really clear sense of purpose.
Absolutely. She always put people first, and she never shied away from making tough decisions. But she always did it with empathy and compassion.
And that's what made her such an effective leader. So I guess that brings us to the end of part one of our deep dives. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to explore. Join us next time as we delve deeper into Jacinda Ardern's time as Prime Minister and the legacy she left behind.
See you then. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive deeper into Ardern's political views and the impact of her policies. We've mentioned she's a social democrat, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, how did her beliefs translate into concrete actions and policies? What does social democracy look like in practice?
Well, at its core, social democracy tries to find a balance between economic growth and social justice. It's about using government intervention to create a fairer society and make sure that everyone benefits from economic prosperity, not just the wealthy or privileged.
So it's not about abolishing capitalism completely, but more like working within the system to make it more equitable.
Exactly. It's about leveling the playing field and giving everyone a chance to succeed, regardless of their background. Ardern's focus on affordable housing, reducing child poverty, and strengthening the social safety net are all examples of that.
Right. Those are all issues that directly impact people's lives. So, for example, what kind of policies did she implement to address those issues?
Well, one example is the Best Start payment, which provides financial assistance to families with young children. It helps with things like childcare costs and make sure that all kids have a fair start in life.
That makes sense. It's about investing in people and creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. But social democracy isn't the only label associated with Ardern. She's also been described as a progressive and a feminist. How did those beliefs shape her approach to governing?
Yeah, those are definitely fitting labels. Her progressive values are evident in policies like raising the minimum wage, expanding access to affordable health care, and legalizing same-sex marriage. These are all policies that promote equality and inclusion.
And on the feminist front, she was a strong advocate for gender equality.
Absolutely. One of her first acts as prime minister was to appoint a gender-balanced cabinet, which sent a strong message about her commitment to equal representation. She also championed policies like increased paid parental leave to make it easier for both parents to share childcare responsibilities. And she addressed issues like gender-based violence and pay inequity.
It sounds like she really walked the walk when it came to her beliefs. She didn't just talk about equality.
Yeah.
She actually implemented policies to make it a reality.
Right, and that's what sets her apart from some other politicians. She was willing to take concrete action to support her values. Now, one thing that came up in the research was her stance on New Zealand becoming a republic. What's her position on that?
Yeah, I was curious about that too. Does she want New Zealand to break away from the monarchy?
Well, she has expressed support for New Zealand eventually becoming a republic, but she's also acknowledged that it's a complex issue that needs to be approached carefully and with the consent of the people. It wasn't a top priority for her government, but it does reflect her progressive outlook and her belief in self-determination for New Zealand.
So it's more like a long-term vision rather than an immediate goal.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the major events that happened during her time in office. The Christchurch mosque shootings were a horrific tragedy. How did she respond to that?
Her response to the shootings was truly remarkable. She immediately went to Christchurch to offer support and comfort to the Muslim community. Her words and actions conveyed a powerful message of unity and compassion, rejecting the hatred and bigotry that fueled the attack.
And she took swift action on gun control as well, didn't she?
Yes, within weeks of the shootings, her government had banned semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles. It was a bold move that showed her commitment to preventing future tragedies and protecting public safety.
It's pretty amazing how quickly she was able to get that done, especially compared to other countries where gun control is such a contentious issue.
Right. It shows her ability to act decisively in a crisis and to put the needs of the people first. And speaking of crisis management, her handling of the COVID-19 pandemic was also widely praised.
Yeah, New Zealand's approach to the pandemic was really different from a lot of other countries. What were the key elements of her strategy?
Well, her approach was based on three main things: science, clear communication, and a sense of collective responsibility. She implemented strict lockdown measures early on based on the advice of health experts, and she made sure to keep the public informed about the situation and the reasons behind her decisions. She also emphasized the importance of everyone working together to protect the most vulnerable members of society.
So transparency and trust were really important to her leadership.
Absolutely. She didn't try to downplay the risks or sugarcoat the situation. She was honest with people about the challenges they were facing, and she acknowledged the sacrifices they were making. This approach helped to create a sense of unity and purpose, which was essential for New Zealand's success in containing the virus.
It sounds like she really understood the importance of connecting with people on a human level and making them feel like they were part of the solution.
Exactly, and that's a quality that I think a lot of people admired about her leadership. However, it's also important to acknowledge that no leader escapes criticism. And as the pandemic wore on, she did face some pushback from people who felt the restrictions were too strict or who disagreed with her approach.
That's understandable. I mean, the pandemic was a really difficult time for everyone, and there were no easy answers.
Right. It's a reminder that there are always trade-offs involved in decision-making and that you can't please everyone all the time. But I think what's important is that she always put the well-being of New Zealanders first, even when it meant making unpopular decisions.
Yeah, it definitely seems like she was guided by a strong sense of purpose and a genuine desire to do what was best for the country. But we focused a lot on the crises she faced. What about her legacy beyond those defining moments? What are some of the long-term impacts of her policies and her leadership style? I'm particularly interested in her approach to climate change and housing affordability, which are issues that have global significance.
These are great questions, and they point to some of the most important aspects of her legacy. Let's start with climate change. As we mentioned earlier, her government introduced the Zero Carbon Act, which set ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and transitioning to a more sustainable economy.
That's a pretty big deal, especially considering the potential economic costs of such a transition. How does she handle those challenges?
She recognized that tackling climate change requires a multifaceted approach involving not just government action, but also collaboration with businesses, communities, and individuals. Her government invested in renewable energy, promoted energy efficiency, and implemented policies to encourage sustainable practices across various sectors. It was about creating a cleaner, more resilient future for New Zealand.
It sounds like she was taking a long-term perspective, recognizing that the costs of inaction on climate change would be far greater in the long run.
Exactly. She understood that climate change is not just an environmental issue, but an economic, social, and moral one. It's about protecting the planet for future generations and ensuring a just transition for everyone.
And what about housing affordability? That's a major issue in many countries these days. What steps did her government take to address that challenge in New Zealand?
Housing affordability was a top priority for her. They implemented a range of policies to try and make housing more accessible, including increasing the supply of affordable housing, cracking down on property speculation, and providing financial assistance to first-time homebuyers. The goal was to make homeownership more attainable, especially for young people and families who were struggling to get into the market.
That sounds like a pretty comprehensive approach.
Yeah.
It's a tough issue to tackle, but it seems like she was committed to finding solutions.
Absolutely. She recognized that housing is a fundamental human need, and she believed that everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to live. Her policies reflect that commitment, even though they weren't without their critics.
Right, there are always going to be people who disagree with certain policies. It's the nature of politics. But what's important is that she was willing to take action and try to make a difference.
Exactly, and I think that's what ultimately defines her legacy. She was a leader who wasn't afraid to tackle tough issues and who always put the needs of the people first.
Yeah.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I think it's worth reflecting on how those values, that commitment to making a difference, have shaped her impact on the world stage and what her enduring legacy might be. But before we do that, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back to wrap things up.
Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into Jacinda Ardern's life and legacy. It's been fascinating to learn about her journey from her early days in rural New Zealand to her time leading the country and engaging with the world on a global stage.
It really has been. And one thing that stood out to me is how she approached global diplomacy with this really interesting mix of idealism and pragmatism. She had strong convictions about things like human rights and multilateralism, but she also understood the importance of collaboration and finding common ground with people who held different views.
Yeah, she seemed to strike a good balance there. And I remember that moment at the UN General Assembly when she brought her baby daughter, Neve, with her. It was such a powerful statement about women in leadership and the changing face of power.
Absolutely. It challenged traditional notions of what a world leader should look like, and it also humanized her on a global stage. It showed that even someone in her position could still be a working mom and juggle all the demands of family life.
It definitely made her seem more relatable and approachable. And speaking of breaking down barriers, her role in the Christchurch call to action was really significant. For those who might not know, this was a global initiative she spearheaded after the mosque shootings to try and combat online extremism.
Right. That was a great example of her leadership in action. She saw a global problem, and she took the initiative to try and address it, bringing together world leaders and tech companies to commit to taking concrete steps to reduce the spread of hate speech and extremist content online.
It was pretty remarkable that she was able to make that happen, especially coming from a relatively small country like New Zealand.
I think it shows that even smaller nations can have a big impact on the world stage, especially when they have a leader who is willing to take the initiative and work collaboratively with others.
It's inspiring to see how she used her platform to advocate for things she believed in and to try and make a positive difference in the world, beyond specific policies or initiatives. I think she also had a broader impact on the way people view leadership. She represented a different style of leadership, one that emphasized empathy, authenticity, and collaboration.
Yeah, I think you're right. She really challenged the traditional image of a leader as someone who needs to be stoic and unemotional. She wasn't afraid to show her vulnerability or to connect with people on a human level. And that resonated with a lot of people, especially during those difficult times of crisis.
Right. People were drawn to her compassion and her ability to inspire hope, even amidst all the uncertainty and fear. But I'm sure there were also people who criticized her approach. Maybe some felt it made her seem weak or indecisive.
Oh, definitely. There were people who felt she was too focused on empathy and not enough on getting things done, or that her collaborative style slowed down the decision-making process. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the fact that there's no one right way to lead.
Exactly. What works for one person in one situation might not work for another person in a different situation. It's all about finding a style that is authentic to you and that is effective in the context you're working in.
And I think Jacinda Ardern showed the world that a different kind of leadership is possible, one that is rooted in compassion and collaboration rather than dominance and aggression.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what do you think her lasting legacy will be? What are the key takeaways from her story?
I think it's still too early to say for sure what her legacy will be, but I think she'll definitely be remembered as a transformative leader, one who challenged traditional norms and who showed the world a different way of leading. She'll be remembered for her handling of crises, her commitment to social justice and equality, and her ability to connect with people on a human level.
It seems like she really left a mark on New Zealand and on the world stage, inspiring people with her vision of a more just and compassionate future.
Absolutely. And I think her decision to step down, while it surprised many, also speaks volumes about her character. She recognized that leadership isn't about clinging to power, but about serving a purpose greater than oneself. And sometimes that means knowing when to step aside and let someone else take the reins.
It's a powerful reminder that true leadership is about more than just ambition or personal gain. It's about making a positive impact on the world and leaving things better than you found them. Well, that's it for our deep dive on Jacinda Ardern. We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did. It's been a fascinating journey exploring her life and legacy, and we've learned a lot along the way.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.